The stagecoach had left her at the crossroads 3 miles east of Hartwell, and she had walked the rest with her bag over her shoulder, and the sun already past its peak. The dust on her boots was not the fine gray powder of settled roads, but the coarser kind that worked into leather. And she had stopped twice to shake it from the hem of her skirt before she reached the first building on Main Street. She was not the first woman to arrive in Hartwell alone, but she was the first in some time, and she could feel the weight of being watched from behind the general store window before she had walked half a block. The boarding house sat at the corner of Main and Cypress, a two-story frame building with a porch that ran the full width and a painted sign that had gone silver at the edges from 3 winters of neglect. A woman sat in a rocking chair near the door, and she did not stop rocking when the stranger approached. The stranger stopped at the bottom of the porch steps. She was not trembling. Her bag rested on the step beside her, and she held the strap with one hand, her thumb working at a spot where the leather had worn thin. "I'm looking for a room," she said. Her voice was level and not soft. "Just for a night or two." The woman in the rocking chair had gray hair pulled back tight and a face that gave nothing away. She looked at the bag, at the dust, at the road behind the stranger where nothing was following. "Full ups," she said. The stranger nodded. She had expected that, or something like it. She set the bag on her other shoulder. "The ranch houses along the river," she said. "Are any of them taking boarders?" "Don't know of any." The stranger looked down the street toward the general store, then back at the woman. The porch step behind her was warped at the corner, and she could see where the nails had worked loose over years of use. She did not mention it. "I can cook," she said. The woman in the chair stopped rocking. Not moving, just the absence of motion for a moment, the creak of the wood settling back into stillness. "Can't say I'm looking for a cook. I'm not saying you are." The stranger shifted the bag on her shoulder. The sun was lower now, the shadows of the buildings reaching across the street toward where she stood. "I'm saying what I can do. Cook, bake bread, mend what needs mending. I'm asking for a room and willing to work for it." The woman's hands rested in her lap. She was looking at the stranger now in a way that was different from before. Not hostile, not kind, just more careful. "You'll want to eat at the saloon if you're staying in town," the woman said. "I can eat light." The rocking chair resumed its slow rhythm. A dog barked somewhere behind the building, twice, then stopped. The stranger stood at the bottom of the steps with her bag, and the dust and the light changing by the minute. And she waited the way a person waits who has learned that moving forward too quickly only makes things harder. The woman on the porch did not invite her up. She did not tell her to leave either. She sat with her hands in her lap and the rocking chair moving in its slow arc. And after a long moment she said, "My sister used to say she could tell what a person was by how they held a bag." The stranger looked down at her own hand, the thumb still working at the worn spot on the strap. How did she know? She didn't. She just liked saying it. A man came around the corner of the building carrying a bucket with water in it. He was perhaps 40, with the kind of face that had settled into its expressions the way wood settles into a frame. Not still, exactly, but no longer fighting the structure it had grown into. He saw the stranger and stopped. "She's looking for a room," the woman said without turning. The man set the bucket down on the porch and wiped his hands on his trousers. He looked at the stranger the way a man looks at weather he's not sure about. Assessing, not judging. "We don't have a room," he said. "I heard. We had a man staying in the back room. He left Thursday." The stranger waited. "Hasn't been cleaned out yet," he said. "And the linens need washing." The woman in the chair turned her head just slightly, watching him now. He did not look back at her. "I can do that," the stranger said. "It's not much of a room." "I didn't ask what it was." He held her gaze for a moment. She did not look away, and she did not look down at the ground the way some people did when they were asking for something. She looked at him like she was measuring whether he was going to say yes or no, and she was prepared for either answer. "There's a pot of beans on the stove," the woman said. "If you're hungry, You might as well eat before you start." The man picked up the bucket again. He did not say welcome. He did not say how long she could stay. He walked up the steps and through the door and was gone. And the stranger followed, and the woman on the porch watched them go, and then returned to her rocking, the chair finding its rhythm again like it had never stopped. The kitchen was larger than it needed to be for two people. The stove was iron and well seasoned, the kind that held heat long past the time the fire died. The beans were in a blue pot with a chip on the rim, and beside them on the counter sat a loaf of bread wrapped in cloth that was still soft. She ate standing at the counter, not because there were no chairs, but because she had learned years ago that sitting down when you were exhausted made it harder to stand back up. The beans were plain, and the bread was good, and she did not rush through either of them. When she finished, she washed the bowl and the spoon and set them on the drying rack. She found a broom in the corner behind the door and began them with the back hallway, sweeping dust and a few stray wheat husks into a neat line. The room at the end of the hall had been occupied by someone who smoked. The walls still held the smell of it, and the mattress on the narrow bed had been left, with the blanket thrown back like someone had just risen. She stripped the bed and carried the linens to the washtub. The work steadied her. It always had. By the time the man whose name she did not know came back to the kitchen, she had finished the room and started on the list of smaller repairs that had accumulated on the counter beside the stove. A button missing from a work shirt, a tear in a curtain that let light through in the wrong place, a cabinet door that hung crooked on its hinges. He stood in the doorway and looked at the shirt she had finished mending, the neat stitches holding the new button in place, and then at the curtain that no longer gaped. "You said you could cook," he said. "I did. What time does breakfast need to be?" She considered this. "What time do you eat now?" "6. I can have it ready at 5:30. He nodded. It was not gratitude. It was not warmth. It was the acknowledgement that she had said something useful, and he had heard it. The woman, whose name she learned the second morning was Vera, ate her meals on the porch when the weather held, and by the window when it did not. She did not join them at the table, and the man, whose name was Calloway, she gathered from the way Vera addressed him, though she had not heard him introduced, seemed to expect this the way a person expects rain in April. He set a plate by the window each morning without comment, and Vera collected it when she was ready, and the arrangement was neither awkward nor close. It simply was. Breakfast was biscuits and gravy on the first morning, eggs and fried bread on the second. By the third day, Calloway asked her, without looking up from his plate, whether she could make soap, and when she said yes, he told her the lye was in the shed behind the well, and the molds were clean. She made soap on a Tuesday when the sky was the color of tin, and the wind came from the north in short, sharp bursts that rattled the shutters. The soap hardened in the molds overnight, and in the morning she cut it into bars and set it on the windowsill to cure. Calloway came into the kitchen at dawn and saw the bars and did not say anything about them. He just reached past them to get the coffee pot and poured 2 cups and set one on the counter near her hand. She noticed where his cup sat. She noticed that he had poured it before he poured his own. She did not mention it. The days fell into a rhythm that was not unpleasant. She woke before dawn and had the fire going before the kitchen warmed. She cooked what was in the pantry and stretched it with flour and water when the supplies ran thin, and said nothing about what she was doing. She mended what needed mending and washed what needed washing, and found the loose step on the porch on a Thursday and fixed it in an hour while Vera watched from the chair that faced the street. "You know carpentry," Vera said. It was not a question. "My father had a farm," she said. "He taught me to use the tools before he taught me to read." Vera rocked once, twice. "My mother could do a lot of things," she said, "but she couldn't hold a hammer straight to save her life." Said she'd tried, and the nail went everywhere but where she was aiming. She must have been good at other things. She was. Vera stopped rocking. "She kept us alive through 3 winters that should have killed us." That was enough. The stranger looked at the step she had fixed, the new nail holding the board straight, and then at Vera's face where something had shifted. Not softened, exactly, but become less guarded, the way a hand opens when it is no longer expecting a blow. Most people aren't good at everything, she said. No, they aren't. They sat with that for a while, the wind and the sound of Calloway's axe from the woodpile and the coffee cooling on the counter. 2 weeks passed. The stranger. She was not a stranger anymore. Not exactly, but no one had called her anything else. Settled into the shape of, I guess, the house the way water settles into a vessel, taking the form of what contains it without losing what it is. She learned which floorboards creaked and which did not. She learned that Calloway took his coffee black, and that Vera preferred hers with honey when it was available, though she never asked for it. She learned these things without being told, the way she had learned everything in her life. By watching, by paying attention, by noticing the small details that other people overlooked or forgot. On a Sunday morning, she found Calloway standing at the window in the kitchen with his back to the room, looking out at the yard where nothing was happening. He did not turn when she came in. He did not speak. He just stood there with his hands at his sides and his shoulders carrying a weight that was not from the wood he had been chopping. She did not ask what was wrong. She set the coffee pot on the stove and measured the grounds and lit the fire beneath it. And she worked in silence while the room filled with the smell of something brewing. Only when the pot began to bubble did she speak. "There's bacon," she said, "and the eggs are fresh from the Henderson place. I know. I can make it however you want." He turned then, and she saw his face. Not the settled, careful expression she had grown used to, but something rawer, something he had not meant for anyone to see. He looked at her the way a man looks when he is deciding whether to say something or keep it inside. And she waited without waiting, without pressing, without doing anything but standing in her place by the stove, with the smell of coffee between them. "My daughter," he said. He stopped. She did not fill the silence. "She's the reason I came here. 6 years ago. She was 7. He looked down at his hands, rough and scarred from years of work he had not chosen, but had accepted the way a man accepts weather. Not because he wanted it, but because it was there. "She's not coming back," he said. "I keep thinking she might. I keep—" He stopped again. His jaw worked once and then stilled. "I keep leaving her room the way she left it. I know it's foolish. I know I should clear it out." "It's not foolish." The words came out before she could stop them, plain and without softening, and she felt the weight of them in the room. He looked at her then, really looked, and she saw something in his face that she recognized because she carried it too. The particular loneliness of loving someone who was gone and could not be reached. "You didn't ask to hear this," he said. "No, but you listened anyway." She poured the coffee. She set the cup on the counter near his hand, close enough that he would understand it was for him, far enough that he could choose whether to take it. She turned back to the stove and cracked the first egg into the pan and did not look at him again. And the silence that filled the kitchen was not empty. It was full of something neither of them named, something that had been building for 2 weeks in small gestures and careful distances and coffee poured before it was asked for. He picked up the cup. He held it without drinking. And she stood at the stove with her back to him and the eggs sizzling in the pan, and she knew, without knowing how she knew, that something had shifted between them. Something small and irreversible, the way a step feels different after it has been fixed. She served the eggs on 2 plates without asking. He could eat or not. It was not an invitation, just the absence of pretense. He came to the table. They ate without speaking, and the sound of forks against ceramic filled the space where words would have been. Through the window, the sky was beginning to lighten. A dog barked somewhere down the street, then stopped. When he finished, he set his fork down parallel to the plate's edge, a small precision. She noticed because she noticed everything about him now. The way he folded his napkin, the way he stood when he was deciding something, the way his shoulders dropped when he stopped guarding against something. She cleared the plates. His hand moved to stop her and then didn't, fingers curling back against the table. "I should go," he said. "I know. The roof can wait another day. It can." He looked at the window. She looked at the counter. Neither moved to break the geometry of the room. His chair angled toward the door. Her body turned toward the sink, the space between them charged with everything unsaid. "Your boy," she said. "He's 7, 8 in October. He'll need breakfast. He will." She turned the faucet. The water ran cold, then warm. She washed the first plate and set it in the drying rack, and the sound was very clear in the quiet kitchen. "Come back tomorrow," she said. Same time. It was not a question. It was not a request. It was the shape of something that had become necessary without either of them choosing it, the way a loose step becomes necessary to fix. Not because anyone says so, but because the foot knows where it wants to rest. He stood, his chair scraped the floor, crossed to where his hat hung by the door, and lifted it and held it a moment before putting it on. And she watched his profile against the pale morning light and did not look away when he turned. "Same time," he said. She nodded. The door opened. The morning came in, cold and smelling of dust and green things growing at the edge of the porch where she had not managed to pull the weeds. He stepped down into it. He did not look back. She stood at the window and watched him cross the street, walk past the general store, turn the corner toward the boarding house, where he rented the room with the window that faced east. He was not hurrying. There was no reason to hurry. What had happened was not an ending. It was a kind of beginning that neither of them had agreed to in words, which made it truer than if they had. She turned back to the sink. The second plate was still there. She washed it and set it in the rack and dried her hands on the towel that hung from the hook by the stove, the one her mother had embroidered years ago in thread that had faded but not disappeared. The coffee cup he had used was still sitting on the counter where she had put it out for him. She poured out what remained and washed that too, and when she set it in the rack beside the plate, she noticed that he had left no ring in the cup. He had drunk it dry. She stood a moment looking at the clean cup. Then she hung the towel back on its hook and went to find her work gloves. 3 days passed. He came each morning and they ate without a schedule. Sometimes eggs, sometimes just bread, and the last of the jam she had made in summer from the berries that grew along the fence line. He brought her a jar of honey from somewhere, left it on the counter without comment. She used it in the bread she baked that afternoon and did not say thank you, which was its own kind of acknowledgement. On the fourth morning, the boy was with him. She was at the counter when they came through the door together, and she saw him hesitate on the threshold. The man saw him looking at her as if asking permission. She kept her hands where they were, still on the bread dough, and gave a small nod. "This is Eli," he said. The boy was thin and watchful, with his father's stillness in the mouth but something softer around the eyes. He stood close to his father's leg and said nothing. "Morning, Eli," she said. "Morning, ma'am." She wiped her hands on her apron and crossed to the stove. "Sit," she said. "There's oatmeal." Eli looked up at his father, who gave the same small nod she had seen the man use himself, and the boy crossed to the table and sat in the chair nearest the wall. His father took the chair by the window. Between them, the distance was precise and deliberate, and she understood. The boy was the reason for the distance. The boy was the reason for everything the man did not say. She served the oatmeal with honey stirred through, and the boy ate with the careful neatness of a child who had learned to make small meals last. She watched him from the stove where she was pretending to be busy, and she saw the way his eyes moved around the kitchen, taking in the embroidered towel, the iron kettle on the hook, the window that faced the street. "You fix things," the boy said. It was not a question. "I do what needs doing. My pa says you needed a roof fixed. Your pa's been helpful." The man looked at his coffee. The boy looked at her. "Can you teach me?" he asked. "Teach you what?" "How to fix things." She glanced at the man. He was looking at the table. She understood that this was the point, that the boy had asked and the man had brought him, and now it was her choice whether to say yes. "Tomorrow," she said. "Bring gloves." The boy's face did something complicated, a smile that he tried to suppress, that broke through anyway. He looked down at his oatmeal and ate faster, and his father said nothing but reached over and steadied the bowl when it threatened to slide. After they left, she stood at the window and watched them cross the street together. The boy walking with his head up now, shoulders squared in a way that looked like his father's, but also looked like something new, something he was practicing. She went back to the bread dough. She punched it down with more force than necessary, and then softened her hands and worked it smooth, and she did not examine why the kitchen felt different with a child in it. She did not examine it because she already knew. Eli came every day that week, and by the following Monday he could hammer a nail straight into a board without bending it. She showed him how to hold the handle close to the head for control, how to look at the grain of the wood and find the soft line where the nail would follow. He listened with the same stillness she had learned to read in his father, and when he succeeded, he did not crow about it. He set the hammer down and looked at the nail and nodded once, as if confirming something he had already suspected. The man came less often. He was working somewhere south of town, he said, building something. She did not ask what. The mornings he could not come, he sent the boy with a note, 2 lines on a scrap of paper, folded once, in handwriting that slanted hard to the right. Ellie 8. He's learning, tomorrow if I can. She kept the notes in the drawer beside the stove. She did not read them again, but she knew they were there, and that was enough. On Thursday the man came himself, in clothes that smelled of sawdust and resin. The boy was not with him. He stood in the doorway and looked at her and did not come in. "I need to ask you something," he said. She set down the bread knife. She wiped her hands on her apron and crossed to where he stood in the rectangle of morning light, and she waited. "Someone at the saloon said things," he said. "About you, about how you came to be here." They didn't know what they were talking about. He stopped. His jaw moved. "I wanted you to know I didn't ask. I didn't want to hear it from anyone else. I know what they say. It doesn't matter to me. I know. But I wanted to say it anyway, out loud. So it was said between us and not anywhere else." She looked at his hands. They were clenched at his sides, the knuckles white. She looked at his face and saw the effort it was costing him to stand there and say this without flinching, and she understood that this was the most he had ever done toward explaining himself to another person. "You're standing in my doorway telling me you don't care what people say," she said. "That's what you're doing." "Yes." "Why?" He didn't answer for a long moment. The street behind him was empty. The dust hung still in the light. "Because I needed you to know," he said. "Before anything else. Before Eli. Before the roof. Before the notes." He stopped. "Before the mornings." She reached past him and pulled the door wider. Not an invitation in, just an opening. He stepped through it, and the door swung shut behind him. And they stood in the kitchen that smelled of yeast and wood shavings, and the last of the morning's coffee, and the distance between them was smaller than it had ever been. She reached up and brushed a piece of sawdust from his shoulder. He did not move. She let her hand rest there a moment longer than necessary, and he let her. That evening, she sat on the porch after the last of the light had gone. The chair she sat in was the one by the railing, the one she had not used until this week because it faced the street and she had never wanted to be seen. Now she sat in it and watched the lamplight come on in the windows across the way. The general store, dark now, and the saloon where the noise was beginning, and the boarding house, 3rd floor, the window that faced east. She did not know which window was his. She had not let herself notice. The night was cool, the first hint of real cold coming from the north. She pulled her shawl tighter and listened to the sounds of the town settling, a horse whinny, a door closing somewhere, the faint clatter of the train still miles away coming in. She thought about what he had said. Before the mornings, the word sat in her chest and did not move, and she did not try to name it. She had spent enough of her life naming things that could not be changed. This was not that. This was something that was still becoming, still open to the shape it might take. Footsteps on the boardwalk. She looked up. He was crossing the street, not hurrying, his hat low against the cool. He did not look at the porch until he reached it, and then he stopped and looked at her as if he had known all day that she would be there. Couldn't sleep, he said. No. Elie's at my sister's, over on Miller Street. I know, Mrs. Cobb told me. He nodded. He was still standing at the edge of the porch, one hand on the railing, and she watched him decide something. Watched the way his shoulders shifted, the way his weight moved. May I sit, he asked. She moved her shawl to one side. He came up the steps and sat in the chair beside hers. And for a long time neither of them spoke. The street was empty. The stars were out, the way they only were when there was no moon. I had a wife, he said, 4 years ago. She was sick all winter and then she wasn't. I'm sorry. It was a long time ago, not long enough. He turned his head and looked at her. She did not look away. No, he said, not long enough. The silence stretched. A dog barked twice and stopped. The saloon door opened and closed, and the sound of it reached them faintly, music and voices, the ordinary noise of people who had not yet found what they were looking for. I don't know what I'm doing, he said. Neither do I. But I keep coming back. Yes. Is that? He stopped. She waited. Is that all right? She looked at his profile in the starlight. She looked at his hands, still on the railing, still. She thought about the notes in the drawer. She thought about the boy and the hammer and the nail that went in straight. She thought about coffee poured before it was asked for, and a door held open, and a step that no longer creaked. Yes, she said, that's all right, he exhaled. It was not quite a sigh, not quite relief. It was something simpler. The sound of a man who had been holding his breath and finally remembered he could let it go. She reached over and put her hand over his on the railing. She did not say anything. She did not need to. The night was cool, and the stars were out, and somewhere a train was coming in from the east, carrying people toward a town that did not yet know their names. He turned his hand over under hers, palm to palm, and they sat there as the train whistle sounded once, twice, and the engine lights appeared at the edge of the valley, bringing something new into a place that was still learning how to hold it. They stayed on the porch until the train passed. She could feel the vibration through the boards, through her palm against his, through the quiet that had settled between them like something that had always been there, waiting to be noticed. The dining car windows glowed gold as it moved north. She wondered who was inside, where they were going, what they were leaving or finding. He watched the lights until they disappeared around the curve past Miller's field. It's late, he said. She nodded but did not move yet. The night air had that particular clarity it gets in October, when the world feels sharp and finite and full. He stood first, slowly, as if moving too quickly might break something. He did not let go of her hand until the last moment, and even then his fingers lingered against hers for one breath longer than necessary. Breakfast at 6, he said, and walked back to his side of the house. She listened to his footsteps on the porch, the door opening, the door closing. Then she sat alone in the dark for a while longer, holding her own hand where his had been. In the morning, the frost lay thin and white across the yard. She could smell wood smoke from the stove he had already lit. When she came inside, he was standing at the counter with his back to her, pouring coffee into 2 cups. He had not knocked on her door, he had not called out. He had simply built the fire and made enough for two and waited, the way a person waits who has decided that patience is its own form of speaking. She sat down at the table. He brought the cups over and set one in front of her, and when he sat across from her, he sat in the same chair he had sat in the first morning, and she realized he had not moved his chair closer in all the weeks since. He had moved himself. She wrapped her hands around the cup and looked at him over the steam. The boy would be along soon. The day would fill with its ordinary demands. But there was this moment first, this quiet, this coffee, this man who poured it without being asked and sat across from her like it was the most natural thing in the world, like he had been doing it for years and would be doing it for years more. She thought later, years later, about that morning, about the cup warming her hands, the frost visible through the window, the way light came in low and gold across the floorboards. She thought about how small the moment had been, how ordinary, how no one would have known to remember it. The boy came in with his cold hands and his questions about breakfast, and the day unfolded the way days do, carrying them all forward into the work of living. But she remembered. She held it the way she held all the things that mattered, quietly, without occasion, without needing anyone else to understand. He finished his coffee and looked at her, and did not say anything either. The space between them was no longer empty. It was full of mornings, of coffee poured without asking, of a step that no longer creaked, of a boy who had stopped flinching, of a woman who had stopped running. She set her cup down, she stood. She walked to the window and looked out at the town waking up below, at the street where people were beginning to move, at the road that ran east and west and north and south, carrying everyone somewhere, carrying no one nowhere. She was not going anywhere. She stayed.